How's it going, Ragamuffins, and welcome back to an ongoing series in which I take characters from your favorite games, movies, anime, and other media, and by process of investigation and logic, try to figure out what class they would be in D&D. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at a character who actually challenges our preconceptions about heroes. He is a demigod who is both egotistical and arrogant, yet wildly generous and giving at the same time. Granted power by the gods and made into an ageless shapeshifter, this warrior based on Polynesian myth has got to be none other than the one and only Maui, the very same from Disney's Moana.
You're welcome.
And this is your spoiler warning. This video will contain major spoilers for the film Moana, so if you want to save the surprises for yourself, then please add this video to your watch later list and continue watching another time. You have been warned. So, Maui is the anti-hero of the movie Moana, and where we have the actual heroine of our story, Moana, taking the lead, she eventually encounters Maui, who isn't really a villain, but is framed as a hero with contrasting values and ideals from Moana. So much that, while watching the film, we are positioned to perceive Maui in a very negative light. It's interesting because from the very start of the movie, we are told that Maui is a trickster and a thief who is responsible for the imminent decay of the world, thanks to his actions in stealing the heart of Te Fiti. Yet when we meet him later on, he explains with a great deal of confidence that he is in fact a hero, and he only took the heart because he believed it would benefit mankind. Which is true, he did believe that. What's interesting about it is even after Maui explains his side of the story, we remain generally opposed to his views. I would say this likely is because regardless of how understandable his story is, the fact remains that he is still responsible for what is a literal curse laid upon the land, and he outright refuses to accept that blame. Whether he denies that there is a curse or he just doesn't care, keeps us poised against him. That is, until Moana forces him to not only attempt to restore the heart, but to also humble himself and learn to revere humans with respect. The Maui we see in the movies is based on the mythological figure of the same name from Polynesian myth, and while one is clearly based on the other, there are in fact stark differences when you put them side by side. For the sake of today's analysis, we are going to be reviewing Maui only as he appears in the movie. As much as I would like to take a deep dive into the expanded myth surrounding this character, there are unfortunately too many varying stories about him to make any reliable determinations. There are some stories that frame him as a beloved hero, while others treat him like nothing more than a deceitful trickster. And since the Disney movie seems to touch on this subject of there being multiple perspectives tied to the myth, it serves as a great reference material for Maui in a general sense. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off, let's look at Maui's weapons, or rather, his weapon, since he only has one. Granted to him by the gods, Maui is the wielder of a giant fish hook known as Manaya Kalani. Maui considers his hook to be his entire identity, struggling with overwhelming self-doubt anytime he is separated from it, or restricted from its power. The power granted by the hook is somewhat ambiguous, but most notably it grants Maui the power to shapeshift into what we can assume is any animal, whether it be completely or partially. It's not really known whether or not these transformations require concentration, but one thing to note is the hook itself vanishes instantly when Maui transforms, except in the case of partial transformations. Suffice it to say, when a complete transformation is active, the wielder of the hook is inhibited from using weapon attacks, which could mean that Maui's animal transformations are considered a battle form. This playstyle is already highly indicative of a druid, as druids are characterized as using primal spell power to use animal transformations in combat, among other situations, which Maui does. But I'm going to have to dismiss this idea since druids transform using an ability called Wild Shape. Unlike most spellcasting abilities, Wild Shape does not use spell slots per se, but rather has its own slots that can't be reserved for other spells. The thing about druids is this is their signature move. It's what they're best known for, and the ability to transform stems directly from their class, not their weapon. With this in mind, I would determine that Maui's hook is an attunement item, and by being attuned to it, grants the wielder the ability to transform. So without even being a druid, Maui can still frame his entire playstyle around fighting in animal form. But I don't think that the spell granted by the hook is actually wild shape. After some searching, I found 0 weapons, let alone items, in the entire D&D database that actually allows a player to use wild shape independently from their class. But what I did find was this. Tiralai is a sentient longsword of sharpness. This weapon has an intelligence of 17, wisdom of 12, and a charisma of 20, which is considerably higher than some players. On top of that, it deals tremendous damage and allows the wielder to communicate with others telepathically, along with a whole host of abilities, including 6 of its own spell slots that can be used to fly, teleport, and polymorph. Polymorph is a spell that, like the name suggests, causes transformation, but unlike Wild Shape, uses traditional spell slots and is typically used on enemies rather than oneself. Now, the rest of Tiralai's abilities are a far cry from anything we see Maui's hook actually do, but I wanted to highlight this weapon to show that animal transformations can in fact be granted by a weapon directly, and I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that a one-of-a-kind magical weapon granted by the gods, like Maui's hook, couldn't also grant polymorph, albeit maybe with some slight alterations. Once attuned to the hook, I believe it would grant the wielder access to a number of spell slots for the use of a polymorph spell, but would come with the condition that the spell can only be directed at the caster. I feel like this makes sense since Maui is able to change forms, but can only do so with the hook in his possession. This also means that despite polymorph being a spell typically reserved for wizards, sorcerers, bards, clerics, and yes, druids as well, he doesn't necessarily have to be any of these classes, which I don't think he is. Maui does have a very high charisma stat, with an obvious proficiency in performance, so if you squint, you might be able to see him as a bard. But outside of those qualities, he kind of falls short. I'm going to say right now he just can't be a bard, if only because bards typically play support roles and are good at controlling the pace of combat, which Maui does not. He actually handles combat kind of methodically, and doesn't allow much room for compromise regarding how he wants to fight. If there is a target, he will destroy it. If he is outnumbered, he will flee. If a party member is under threat, he will pull aggro. It borders on predictability, but the thing I've noticed is Maui is constantly at the mercy of needing to work around whatever his opponent is planning. So he just figures things out as he goes, I guess. This playstyle likely stems from his overwhelming confidence. He believes he is untouchable, therefore, who needs a plan, right? This untouchable quality about Maui makes me believe that whatever class he is, he must have a very high AC, along with a lot of hit points, and I think that makes sense. Maui is very good at avoiding taking hits, and what hits he does take typically fail to take him out of commission. I think we've all played with someone at some point in our lives who built a character to have as high of an AC with as many hit points as possible. Hello, by the way, that's me. Anyways, my point is the damage sponge is not an uncommon build. When it comes to dealing damage, Maui almost exclusively uses the hook. He relies mostly on his animal transformations to move around the battlefield, but is quick to morph back when it's time to hack off limbs. His transformations are also used for finding inns for dealing this damage, so you could think of his polymorph forms as a slashing damage delivery device. Outside of combat, the hook is also used for performing seemingly impossible feats like pulling new islands above the water's surface or bringing the sun closer to Earth. We don't really get to see Maui do any of this, but Maui is covered in tattoos that are visual representations of these achievements. By watching Mini Maui reenact these moments, we can see that even though the hook is needed for some of them, others are achieved under his own strength and skill, like lifting up the sky or harnessing the breeze. Initially, I wanted to say that the strength needed in order to achieve these feats must also come from the hook, but we see that even without it, Maui has incredible strength. Like, I know canoes aren't that heavy, but lifting one over your head with such finesse and so effortlessly just isn't possible. Keep in mind that even while separated from the hook, Maui doesn't age. Such a trait is obviously caused by his demigod status, which clearly comes with a host of other properties, and any powers he gains from the hook are just a bonus. So without the hook, what are his powers? We already know he's ageless and has super strength, but likely his strongest skill is wayfinding.
It's seeing where you're going in your mind.
As Maui explains, it's essentially navigating the seas by creating a mental map in your mind based around knowing where you're going by knowing where you've already been. Despite not using or even keeping any physical cartographer tools, I would say that Maui still has proficiency in them, and am going to make the argument that his cartographer tools are all in his head. Certainly, he's an expert navigator, so I feel like this just makes sense. This doesn't really help us though, since tool proficiencies aren't really tied to classes. Honestly, Maui is just a pretty hard character to crack here. So far, all we can see is a character who has maxed out strength with a very high AC and a lot of hit points, whose fighting style revolves around using polymorph via his weapon to help him navigate battles quickly and deal heavy slashing damage to enemies. He doesn't like using teamwork, but when forced into that situation, usually adopts the role of a tank and puts most of his effort into distracting foes, even if it's a losing battle. Because of Maui's very tank-like build, and for the fact that he clearly channels divine power through his hook, I am going to say that of all the available classes, Maui is most likely to be a Paladin, specifically an Oath to the Ancients Paladin. Paladins who use Oath to the Ancients have a lot of traits reminiscent of Rangers and Druids, using skills and spells that revolve around communicating with and utilizing the power of nature. And while we may not see Maui do too much like this in the movie, it's worth mentioning that he is gifted the hook at the end of the film by Tefiti, a goddess of nature. Maui may not make use of his other abilities, but they may well still be available to him. Something Oath to the Ancient Paladins can do that we get to see Maui do is plant growth. Typically, it's a druid spell, but Oath to the Ancient Paladins can also use it to, as the name implies, grow plants. And if we're to believe all of Maui's big achievements, then you'll recall that he is also responsible for coconut trees, which he grew by killing an eel and burying its guts. I don't know about you, but I don't think that would ever work if I tried it, or at least not without a little spell power, which Maui would have access to as an Oath to the Ancients Paladin. Apart from that, his astounding AC and volume of hit points is very typical of a paladin, and when it comes to his arcane focus, you could argue that his tattoos actually fill that role. They are a gift from the gods similar to the hook, so they could be considered a holy symbol through which Maui can draw upon the magic needed to use things like super strength or to age endlessly. That would explain how he is still able to have these powers while being separated from the hook, which could also be an arcane focus, but offers a completely different list of abilities. So there you have it. While Maui may have the aesthetic of a druid, and even play like one, we can safely dismiss that possibility in favor of him running a very specific build as an Oath to the Ancients Paladin. Because we can attribute his animal transformations to spell slots provided by his hook, along with being able to channel divine power through that weapon, it becomes plain to see what his real class is when you look at his primary ability scores, which are evidently strength, dexterity, and constitution, as well as having saving throws in wisdom and charisma. All signs of being a paladin. This build to me looks like someone wanted to create a joke character who resembles a druid in every way, be it aesthetically or mechanically, but is completely not a druid. And honestly, if I ever get the opportunity, I might just try that myself because it sounds like hilarious fun. With all of this said, please leave your comments and let me know what you think. Do you believe that Maui could actually be a paladin, or did I miss something? Let me know who else you would like to see covered in a future episode, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel as well. Make sure to hit the bell icon so you can get instant notifications anytime there's a new upload, and share this video with your friends too. Honestly, I'd love to get as much interaction on this video as I can. Since I spent a lot of time working on it, it'd be great to see what as many people as possible think. This channel is still pretty small, but your views and likes and everything else really helps me mold it into something I can be really proud of. So thank you so much for watching my video today, and thank you even more if you made it all the way to the end. My name is Raggy Rog, and I'll see you next time, Ragamuffins.